Malorie, Nicole, welcome to the show. I'm glad to have you here. Please let the audience know a little bit about your background and what you're doing today, and let's dive in.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I do executive and entrepreneurial coaching. I am sure that the audience is familiar with what coaching is, but really what I like to do with people is help them understand the subconscious blocks that are getting in the way of business and overall holistic performance in their life. So this can range from working on team performance, working on how they're showing up to their leadership positions, improving relationships at home, because you or I are the center of our world. So when we work on ourselves, it really changes and cultivates a really big shift in our entire life. So that's what I work on.
Wow. So what are some of these subconscious blocks that you work on?
Well, the subconscious mind is really interesting. And I don't think that in the business world, because we have a tendency to focus so heavily on tactics, that we give it enough credit for the role it's actually playing in our day-to-day life. So if you really think about what you think about in a day, you will start to notice that you think about the same things. You have repetitive patterns that are going on in your brain pretty much 24/7 every single day that are the same that they were yesterday, the day before that, the day before that. So really helping people understand what these, some people call them limiting beliefs. I call them mental barriers, what these blocks are that are preventing them from creating expansion or more growth in their business or more fulfillment in their life. And the thing about subconscious blocks is that they really go back to a lot of childhood programming and childhood beliefs. So most of the time, people don't even realize they're there or that they exist.
Well, that's really interesting. Now, how does it differ as far as these messages I'm giving myself, this play? It reminds me that, what was it? I think somebody said that a huge percentage of our day was all driven by habit. Must have been The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, or the guy who wrote Atomic Habits or something like that. But it sounds like what you're saying is these subconscious messages really drive us. And if we don't catch them, we can't work on the weak ones and build on the strong ones.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Both of those works are both of those people tap a lot into this. Yeah.
So what are some of the biggest, let's start with the bad first. I mean, what are some examples of the bad ones that are stopping some of your clients and you work them through?
So I'll give you an example here, because a lot of times it's stuff that you would never even dream of. It's like, what? Are you kidding me? That's really going on. So I was working with a CEO who's still a client, and he was really struggling with asking. And that word asking, asking for help, asking for money that he deserves to get paid, asking for receiving. So really asking was a block for him. And I knew immediately, all right, you've got this business problem that's showing up. You're not using your voice. You're not really asking your employees to do what you really want them to do. You're not asking your clients to pay you what you want to get paid. What is really going on here? So, of course, I don't just dive headfirst straight in, but I ask him permission to really go a little bit deeper and further into this problem. And we uncovered a couple of things. One specifically of when he was a child, there was a pretty traumatic instance where he asked for something, and it was as simple as asking for a sandwich at a restaurant. Well, his family didn't have a lot of money at the time, and one of his parents got incredibly frustrated and angry that he had asked for the sandwich. So that instilled this belief in him that asking was not safe. And I share this in detail like this because the emotional response that he actually had to uncovering that, he had a full-on emotional body response to going back to that memory and shedding it and letting it go. And it just goes to show how much these crazy things that happen in our childhood that maybe don't seem like that big of a deal. Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't, really do play into business problems that we're not identifying.
Yeah, in a major way. And really sad too, because his parents were probably just embarrassed that they were in that situation, and maybe he had vocalized it in public, and so they were under all kinds of internal torment also. Interesting how that affected him. So asking was in that situation. What are some of the other ones that come up that are common that, the audience could think about?
Absolutely. The alternative of this, let's go in the other direction. So there is a client that I worked with earlier last year that I'm thinking about right now. And he grew up in a house that conflict and emotions were not ever addressed. Like everything was very surface level. Nobody ever had deep conversations. Nobody got real excited, but nobody ever got really mad either. It seemed like on paper, all right, you grew up in a pretty decent house. There wasn't a whole lot going on. Mom and dad didn't do anything really crazy. But in kind of working with him further and uncovering some of this resistance that he was feeling himself in his world, and just this almost like this frustration that was in his chest. You hear people talk about stress and where they hold it in the body. He held it in his chest. And it was really this fear of even feeling any type of emotion at all, because it was so uncomfortable just to have some level of feeling or emotion that he wasn't allowing himself to do it. And I'm not talking about, emotionless, like very emotional women in this case. I'm talking about men and women. This is a guy that I'm giving an example to. He didn't even really know how to feel connected with himself because of this quote unquote safe house that he grew up in that actually never really addressed emotion at all.
Yeah, it's interesting. I can relate to that a little bit. I mean, my parents were more lively than that and very loving, but we never really went deep on conflict. So really how to work through that. So I can understand that. And that definitely would affect your ability to relate to other people. Mm-hmm. So it also creates, so it's almost, you're constantly avoiding conflict versus dealing with some difficult issues. And if you want to really be great at whatever you do, whether you're in leadership or in a line role, you still have to make decisions, and you would avoid the difficult ones, right?
Absolutely. Which brings me to another person that I'm thinking about when you say that, because she really felt like she had a pattern of overthinking in her life. And she didn't know why, she's running this team of 15 people. Money's coming. Money is not a problem. They're doing the numbers that they need to be doing. But every decision that she made felt like such an intense decision. And she wasn't really understanding why that was happening the way that it was happening, but it wasn't overthinking at all. It had nothing to do with overthinking. It solely had to do with every decision that was connected to potential conflict. She was going down a rabbit hole and spiraling to try and figure out how to avoid that conflict. So she felt like she was an overthinker. Really, she's just trying to avoid conflict in her business and in her life. So it's exactly what you just said.
I'm curious because this conflict thing's come up several times. So how do you recommend leaders, let's say the conflict hasn't blown up yet, mm-hmm. but they sense, this person's got this opinion, this person's got an opposing opinion, and there's some intensity, things are building, things haven't blown yet. How do you recommend that leaders step in there, get involved, and eliminate the conflict before it happens?
Mm-hmm. So for me, if I was working with someone, there's two approaches. I want to do the deep work with someone, and I want to understand the deeper patterns like we've been talking about on these last few examples. But then I also want to talk about the tactical. How is somebody actually approaching the situation? What tone of voice are they using? What words are they saying to start and initiate the conversation? I am all about energy and intention. And I do believe that if you go into a potentially conflicting conversation with your guard up, you should expect that it's going to be worse. We don't have to go into things with our guard up. We might have a little voice that we do because we're trying to protect ourselves, but it really starts at that beginning part of maybe taking a deep breath. I know that seems so simple, but it's crazy how much just taking a deep breath and going, all right, how am I going to go into this, and asking yourself, how am I going to address this conversation? How that will just allow you not to have that quick, fired off, rapid, maybe stressed out tone of voice or angry energy that you could put off otherwise.
It strikes me that, so first of all, you're kind of doing a reset on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first thing. Do you also find that people have to do a reset on the quick judgment they're making on one or more parties that they're about to approach?
Absolutely, because this is how it works. It's like a mirror. The more you do your work, you will start to see your team differently. So instead of jumping to conclusions and saying, oh, well, so-and-so is the problem here. They're not performing the way they need to be performing. And no wonder this Bobby Joe is mad at her, or, whatever the case may be. You're going to sit back, because you are a conscious thinker. You do your own work. You're going to look at both people. Let's say it's involving two other people in this potentially conflicting thing that you're dealing with. And you're going to consider, what might they be thinking? How are they really showing up to this experience, so that I can try and find a middle ground here for everybody, versus just assuming that somebody's in the wrong. Because to be honest, most of conflict, and if you think about this in your marriage or your personal relationships, if you have them, if you're listening, most of conflict is really just miscommunication. It's just not understanding what each party is trying to say.
Yes, I agree with that. And I think also it's unmet expectations, which again relates back to communication. Because the expectations were either not communicated and they were assumed, or they were under communicated. So there was a misunderstanding.
Absolutely.
When the expectations are clear and there's been good communication, and the person fails, then what happens?
So that is a great question. And I would like to just share a little story here again on this. I'm thinking back to the client that we're talking about was having a hard time asking. That is something that we actually covered in our work together. There were a few employees that weren't necessarily doing the work that they were supposed to be doing. So we really had to address, is the expectation being set? So that's the first part. Are you doing your job? Are you setting the expectation? Because if you're not setting it, you should expect that nobody's going to follow through and you're not going to get what you want, right? Yep. And it's okay to have a healthy way to set those expectations. If it's not being met, I'm a big believer that everybody really actually does want to do a good job. Everybody really does want to perform in a way that makes them feel good. But we all have our own issues. We all have our insecurities. We all have our own stuff. And I believe that being in a leadership role, you might be working with a coach, but it's also required that you learn some coaching skills and some coaching techniques so that you can go to your employees, and versus saying, you're not doing X, Y, and Z, you can approach the conversation like you might in a coaching relationship and try and help them understand themselves a little bit better, and help you understand what's going on in their world. Why isn't this really happening? Why aren't these expectations being met? Are they, putting a face on, pretending they're happy in the position that they're in and they're really miserable? Do they feel like they don't actually have all the resources that they need to move forward? Are they really struggling with procrastination because something else is going on? And you can really identify the root of what is actually happening.
Yeah, and then act upon that. That makes perfect sense. Let's flip this a little bit, because I like to emphasize that people should work on their strengths. Mm-hmm. What are some of the subconscious messages that people have that are strengths, but if they understood them better, they could then build on those strengths even more and be more successful, powerful, achieve more, have better relationships, whatever it might be?
Yeah, that's a great question. And to answer it, maybe not in the way that you were hoping, but I take away the things. So I believe that we all actually have all of these beliefs about ourselves. And it's not about, writing them down more. It's not about doing this morning formula every day that's going to enhance it. It's about understanding what's blocking it in the first place. So it's almost like we're walking around with 25 sweaters on, and we need to take each sweater off to understand that we all inherently were born into this world believing that we were super powerful, confident beings. And then we go through school and some things happen and we create insecurities. And then we get older and some more things happen and we create more insecurities. And after this removal process happens, then you're really going back to yourself with all of those beliefs that you were born into this world with about how powerful you really are to create all of the expansion that you want. I mean, the only difference between somebody incredibly successful and somebody that isn't, the only difference is what happens between this right here, what happens in their head. That's the only difference. It's not a matter of how many resources they're given. And, there's a lot of studies that go on to show that really poor people can become very, very successful. That's not to say that it doesn't make it easier if you are someone with privilege and have more resources and can make it happen in a quicker way. I'm not saying that at all. But the power of your mind and the power of your ability to think for yourself and what you're capable of is far beyond any resources that you'll ever be given.
Interesting you say that. And particularly, a couple of thoughts come to mind. Dr. Henry Cloud wrote a book, and the name escapes me at the moment now, but he said that he studied successful people, and he agreed with exactly what you're saying, that the amount of resources they had, the amount of quote unquote luck or whatever they had, circumstances, and maybe even to a certain extent, I don't think it was level of intelligence, but he said it really didn't matter. And his conclusion was that successful people, the main differentiator that he concluded was that when they made a mistake, they didn't repeat it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that comes back to, I think, a lot of the subconscious thought you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Because when you're locked in a cycle, you're going to make a mistake and then you're going to repeat it.
Absolutely. And to add to what you just said, such a great example of that, you got to be willing to make mistakes. Because if you're struggling, with a subconscious belief that you have to be perfect and you can't screw anything up, and, this goes back to a lot of being rewarded for the good things that you've done in life. I know there's a lot of studies on that right now, if that's really actually the most beneficial thing to do for people versus being rewarded for your effort that you put in. You can really find yourself in this position where you're not actually living to your full potential if you have that fear of risk, because we all make mistakes. I mean, I've made plenty of mistakes in my business, but that comes with many rewards on the other side of it, because I've been willing to see, I'm going to do this anyways, and maybe it's going to flop and maybe it's not going to work, but I'm not wrapping my identity of who I am up in this potential mistake.
Yeah, I have to totally agree with you, because back in February 2003, I had a clear message that I'm to go teach people to avoid my mistakes. It wasn't go teach people because you're so smart, Dave. It was, Dave, you've made some pretty big mistakes. Go help people avoid them. And it's really helpful for me. And as I move forward, going back to the subconscious messaging type of thing, even just yesterday, to be candid, I was starting to go through my day because I was going to go pick up my fiance, and I was thinking, we were going to talk about the day, and I started to think about the different things in the day, and everything I thought about, I put a negative spin on it. Mm-hmm. This wasn't good enough. This wasn't good enough. This wasn't good enough. And by the way, that's one of the negative messages I have to overcome in my life is you're not good enough type of thing. And I paused and kind of asked about that and got a reply that, hey, there was positive in those things. You need to look at the positive. You need to pull out the positive. Mm-hmm. And apparently, even though I'm a fairly optimistic guy, if not very optimistic, that negative subconscious messaging still has some work that I've got to do on it. And really just to look at each thing. And particularly when we talk about work relationships with people, as we were just discussing, you can walk into a situation that may be potential conflict or maybe where performance is lacking. And you're already judging and focusing on the negative. Whereas, as you brought up, if you can go in and think about the person and start a dialogue, asking questions, what's going on? We agreed on X, you're at Y, boom, boom, boom. That takes some work to develop that discipline, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And I think it really connects to what you just shared on the observation that you had about what went on in your inner dialogue, because we're both human here. We're having this conversation. We both deal with it. Everybody that's listening deals with it. And it is about becoming more neutral. So we put a lot of charge to things. We sometimes will look at that and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm so negative. How could I possibly be still doing this? Why do I have all of these negative thoughts? I read that personal growth book last week. I was supposed to stop this. And we immediately shift into self-judgment versus just going, wow, I've been pretty negative today. That's really interesting. And really just not having a positive or negative charge about it, just being completely neutral. And that's not to say that we don't need to feel emotions, but I believe that that is something that can help us in these potentially conflicting conversations, whether it be in the workplace or at home, just approaching it with more of a neutral attitude. I'm not super fired up about this, but I'm also, not going to be super negative about this. I'm just opening up the conversation.
It seems like I can do neutral on the judgment side, whether it's internal or external judgment. But for me, it was helpful to say, oh, wow, I looked and then go back through the list of things I'd gone through yesterday and say, oh, yeah, well, this part was really positive about that. This part was really positive. And oh, yeah, that big thing that happened, there was a nice thing that happened. I'm totally overlooking that. I'm not even paying attention to it. And so I need to kind of calibrate the brain a little bit and my habits, as Duhigg and whatever the guy who wrote Atomic Habits wrote.
James Clear.
Clear. So those guys wrote about it. I got to adjust the habit so that I'm seeing the positive. I still I like your neutral thing. I need to be neutral. I need to be aware, very much aware of the entire picture, not just see the positive. But I got to make certain my focus is on the most important thing and the healthiest thing. Isn't it the healthiest thing to focus on the positive or reinforce the positive while still being aware that there's some other things going on?
Absolutely. I totally believe in everything that you just said. And just to emphasize that, the neutrality part of it would just be so that you're not creating negativity without giving yourself that space and that time, whether it's an inner dialogue conversation you're having with yourself, or when you've started a conversation with someone and you're like, oh man, this is not going the way that I wanted it to go. It's gotten fired up really quickly. If it had a little bit of neutral ground in there, it creates more space to do exactly what you just said and shift the intention and shift the focus, to figure out what needs to happen from there. Whether it be you shifting back into that positive thinking for yourself or some type of problem solving that needs to happen in a conversation with somebody else.
So if I'm someone I'm listening to this podcast and this intrigues me, what are steps I can take to start to be more aware of my subconscious messaging, or whatever term you want to use?
Yeah, I love to question myself. And I say that not promoting anybody to walk around overthinking all day long, every day, but much to like you just gave in your own example, sometimes I don't think we even stop long enough to go, what am I thinking about? What's been going on in my head for the last 45 minutes? Am I even aware of it? I'm going through a home renovation right now, like I mentioned, and there's a lot of trying to balance the work life and being in a home renovation at the same time. And I've had to really focus on, okay, you know what? You got to stop telling yourself that this home renovation needs to be done yesterday, because it just is what it is right now. So you need to figure out how to find your internal peace with it so that you can still do the things that you need to do. But when we don't give ourselves the opportunity to question our stories and question our thoughts and look at our inner dialogue, we're never going to change them. So that's the first thing right there. Why did I tell myself that this needed to be done yesterday? Oh, because you're struggling with, some type of perfection story that's showing up, that everything just needs to be figured out really quickly. Then you can go deeper and figure out what's really, really irritating you and going on. Or, it doesn't have to be irritating you. Just allows you to see what's going to provoke and create more expansion in your life if you give yourself the chance to go there.
It seems that you need to work with others, though, whether you work with a coach or a therapist, a group of friends, or people who share your spiritual beliefs, where you want to get together and kind of share your souls in confidence, and they are healthy people or something, it seems like you need to do something more than work on your own or read a book.
I agree with you. I do. And I'm not saying that in terms of my work specifically. I believe that in all regards, we only get so far on our own. It's really simple. We only get so far by ourselves. So if we need help, we just need to find someone to help us.
Yeah. And I think it's for a season. It's not necessarily that, hey, I'm going to go be part of this group, although you may develop some friendships that last for decades, and that's wonderful. Or I'm going to work with this coach. I have, one client I think I worked with for 5 years. But most of my clients I work with for, 6 months to a year, and then they're off on their own. We've, done my work. They've made the change they want to make, and they go. So I think that's great. So in that regard, if people want to learn more about what you do, and where would they go? How would they find out more about you?
Yeah, the easiest way to get to my website is the back end. It's to go to abundantlyclearpodcast.com. My name is spelled a little bit tricky, so I got that URL a couple years ago, abundantlyclearpodcast.com, and you can go check out some client stories. I've got 200 episodes on my show. You will be airing there pretty soon here. And I also have an assessment that I take people through to help them really understand and uncover maybe what some of those subconscious beliefs are that they haven't yet recognized and seen that are creating business or personal blocks and problems in their life that they want to get rid of and improve.
Cool. Well, Malorie, I really appreciate it. And I also want to encourage the audience, don't just think of yourself. Think of some of the people you know, maybe some of the people you love in your personal life, some of the people you work with. Maybe there's someone there that you should recommend check out Malorie's stuff and what she's doing. And maybe there's an opportunity for growth there, and it'll be really beneficial. So thank you very much for being on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.